Okay, so let's start. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Tonight, what we're going to do today, first of all, Chag Sameach, Happy Hanukkah. Um, I didn't specifically change to anything Hanukkah related. I might interject some Hanukkah themes to what's going on in Shemuel, but I just felt like we're in a flow and it wasn't worth like stopping. Not that it's not good to talk about Hanukkah, but I thought we could continue about this. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is the essentially the downfall of Shaul HaMelech. Not the downfall, like his final hour. We've been seeing his downfall, excuse me, but it's really his final hour. He's gonna come to his death at this point in the story. And what's interesting is last lesson we spoke about the we know because retrospectively we know the story, the final meeting of David and Shaul, which was when David was able to almost kill Shaul. He didn't kill Shaul. Shaul blessed him and said, "Oh, you're right, I'm wrong." That whole thing, promised not to kill him. Obviously, David did not have faith in that. So we ended off that was their last meeting. And just to recap a second, and David realizes that as long as I'm in Eretz Israel, Shaul is going to try to kill me, and I have to get out. So last we saw him was he left Eretz Israel, he went into Galut, and he went with the Plishtim. Now I spoke about this for like a little bit at the end of last lesson, and we're gonna talk about it more today. But basically, what's going on now? What we're going to see now till Shaul's death, basically in this lesson. It's a few prakim, but I put it into this one lesson. Is what we're going to see is that that we're going to bounce back and forth. The story is going to bounce back and forth to what's happening with Shaul and what's happening with David. So we end off that meeting. Shaul goes stays in Eretz Israel. David runs away, and he goes to Achish, as I said before. And now, it's funny. The Navi, the story doesn't paint Achish as a evil leader. He is the Plishti leader. He is the enemy of Israel, but he's not out of the ordinary. He's not doing anything specifically to torture Israel. He's being an enemy leader and fighting with them and wanting to get their land and something normal in warfare. He's not anything out of the ordinary. So we see him as that type of king when he's not painted as anything excessively evil. But we do see that he's painted as naive. And David either knows this or he's being very, very attuned to this because he's using the Achish's naivete and gullibility to his advantage. So by the way, just to be clear, this is going to be about Shaul's final hour and his death, but we're going to be back and forth mirroring that to what's going on with David because we're going to see how the juxtaposition is showing David's getting ready to fully be king and Shaul fully losing that. So he's in the land of the Plishtim. He goes to Achish, and the commentators, the Hamim, talk about, is this the same Achish? If you remember way back in the beginning of his running away, he went and he acted crazy. Is this the same Achish? Is it not? It doesn't really matter because at this point it is widely known through the lands that Shaul is after David, and it makes logical sense to someone not knowing that David is the anointed king and the chosen one, that it makes sense that he would forsake his people and leave the people and be very against his people because the leader of his people is trying to kill him and getting the whole nation against him. So it's not so, we see he's a little bit naive, but it's not coming from nowhere. It does make sense that someone in David's position would leave his nation and would choose to side with his enemy's enemy. So he goes to Achish, but that obviously, as we know, is not David's plan. He's using this as a safety tactic, and he convinces Achish. He tells Achish, why am I going to live, in the main city with the king? Give me some city and let me, do my own thing so I don't bother you. And he gives him the city of Siklag, and the city of Siklag is under Yehuda, Ad Yom Hazeh, meaning until this was written. So David very charismatically gets Achish to give him Siklag, and this is to his benefit because what he does in Siklag is basically he takes his people. He's with 600 people at this point. He started with 400, 200 came, and he's going and doing ambushes to the surrounding nomadic nations, tribal nations that are also against Israel, and he's fighting them. So even in Galut, protecting El, it says ויפשטו את הגשורי והגריזי והעמלקי, כי הנה השבט אשר מעולם השורה ועד ארץ מצרים. He is basically fighting all these nations in the south, and the way he does this in order to not make Achish suspicious is that he destroys everyone. It says, לא יחיה איש ואישה ולקח צאן ובקר וחמורים וגמלים בגדים. He destroys everyone, all the people, so no one could go and tell Achish what's going on. And then Achish comes and says, David, how's it going? And David tells Achish, I'm fighting the people of Yehuda and the Negev, and I'm fighting Israel. So David is fighting for Israel this whole time, they're enemies, and Achish thinks that he's fighting Israel and becoming on his side. And this comes to the point where ויאמן אחיש בדוד לאמור, האש האיש בעמו בישראל והיה לי לעבד עולם. Achish is so confident in David's connection with him. He's thinking he is my loyal servant, my loyal subject, and he totally left his people. And this is obviously not the case. The Hachamim do look at this as a bit of a criticism. On the one hand, it was a good thing that David was defending his people. First of all, he had to protect himself, so he was using Achish, that relationship, for self-preservation, and he was able to help Israel even when he was not with Israel. However, the Hachamim do say that the fact that he really destroyed the whole cities to protect himself so that Achish wouldn't know what he was doing wasn't really the best way to go about this. And in Divrei Yamim, when he wants to build the temple and God tells him no, it says there's blood on your hands, the Hachamim point to what blood is on his hands. They point to this blood. That this blood that he spilled that wasn't necessarily warranted. So it's just interesting different perspectives of what David was doing at this time. And then we see that David gets so high up in Achish's good favor, is that they're getting ready to go fight Israel, the Plishtim, as they do, right? As we saw many times in the book. And Achish tells David he wants David to come with him. And David says, will you come with me? I want you to know if you're going to be loyal to me. And David gives a very vague answer. And he says, you know what your servant's going to do. So he puts it, he sort of, spins it back on him. He's like a very good, he puts a spin on it, and then lachen shomer leroshi asimecha. So Achish hears that as that David's going to defend me, and I'll put you as one of the heads of my army. Now, what we know as the readers, I'm going to tell you, is that this war that they're going out to is going to be Shaul's last war. Shaul's going to die in this battle, as we're going to see in a minute. So it's just very interesting. David, we're going to see in a minute, we're going to see how, as the story progresses, how he doesn't end up going to the battle. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit, because now I said we're going to keep switching scenes. Now we're going to switch to Shaul for a bit. But we're going to see how David is left in a very precarious situation, because he is left in the position of going to fight Israel, which he obviously doesn't want to fight. He's defending them this whole time secretly. But what's he going to do? Because he has to protect his own life and his image with Achish. So there is another event that happens that stops David from going to the war. But we have to sort of imagine what's going on in David's mind at this point, and his people's mind. Like, is this really going to happen? Are we really going to go fight? What's going on? And we're going to leave that on pause for a minute. And by the way, this is actually one of my like favorite parts of Tanakh, because it's what we're coming up to right now. With Shaul, because it's so there's just so much beauty in all the the connections that we're going to see and how it all comes full circle. So we see what David's doing. We see him in Siklag with the police team. And then we jump to a little bit of a seemingly random pasuk where it talks about Shemuel met, Shemuel died. That he was, they had said eulogies and they buried him. And Shaul took away all the soothsayers and mediums and sorcerers and any of that black magic from the land. Now, this seems like a very unrelated, weird pasuk. We already knew about Shemuel's death a while back. We knew he died. We were told he died. We were told he was buried a while back already. And what is the relevance of Shaul, taking away all this black magic and sorcery? Reading forward, we're seeing this is foreshadowing to what happens in the story with Shaul. So keep that in mind because this is going to be very important to what's going on in Shaul's side of the story now and how he walks to his death in the end. By the way, actually, no, I'll say that after. So now Shaul sees what we were told about. The Plishtim are getting ready for war. He's shaken. He's so frightened. He doesn't know what to do. And as we saw many times also with Goliath, with the other wars, we saw very few wars where he did step up, right? And he's frightened. He's petrified, more than frightened, And he tries to ask God what to do. And this is ironic because as we saw many times in Shaul's career, he did not ask Hashem. He avoided asking Hashem what to do. When he started to ask Hashem and then something else happened, he decided to act a different way. So it's very interesting. We see a little bit of sort of a tikkun in his desperation almost, that he's so much searching to see God, in dreams, in nebu'ah, with the kohanim, with all different ways, and God is not answering him, right? And we know God's not answering him because he has the ruach ha'ah, and God left him, right? It said many times, Hashem sa'am me'alav, God left him, and Shaul is so desperate, and this is where the pasuk before comes in, is that he asks his servants to look for Eshet Balat Ov. Now, what is the Eshet Balat Ov? And Eshet Balat Ov is someone who is known to raise the dead and communicate with the dead. And Shaul, we're going to see, wants to communicate with Shemuel. And that's why this whole Shemuel dying, Shaul taking away all this, all the sorcery was important to what's going on now, because Shaul feels, I'm like, it seems, we don't really know, obviously, but it seems that Shaul's at a point where he's so desperate and he feels like, how did I get myself in this situation? What am I going to do? Shemuel's the one who anointed me, who put me in this leadership role. He's going to have to tell me how I could figure this out. So he asked his servants to find Eshet Balat Ov, and it was obviously something that wasn't so easy to find because of the fact that Shaul probably killed or kicked them out of the land or whatever it may be. So either they were in secret or there wasn't so many, and they find one in Endor, in this place in Endor. And what Shaul does is he dresses up, he wears different clothing. He goes with two people, right? He's the king. He's not going with an entourage, he's going with two people dressed in other clothing. And they go obviously at night, in the stealth of the night, in the quiet of the night. So a few things before we talk about what actually happens. But we see that, again, we spoke about it, the theme of clothing here in the story, in the Sefer of Shemuel, is so important. We see the idea of clothing when people make brits, right? When they make covenants. We see the idea of clothing with the clothing of Malchut, with the clothing of war, armor, with Shemuel. Like, we see all these different levels of clothing. And here too, Shaul has to disguise himself, dress up in clothing, and goes to this Balat Ov. And the woman sees him, and he says, I want you to raise someone for me. And she says, don't you know what Shaul did? Like, I can't. I'm not risking my life for this. And she's like, this is a death sentence if I do this, if he hears this. So it seems like, to Shaul's credit, he was eradicating a lot of Avodah Zarah and other, bad influences from the land, to his credit. But obviously, he's so desperate at this point. And we obviously he was doing a good job at it if she was afraid, right? But what does Shaul do? Vayishava la Shaul ba'Hashem lemor chai Hashem im yikrech avon b'davar hazeh. He swears to Hashem that nothing's going to happen to her. Now the Chamim not necessarily poke fun at this, but they just sort of say he's swearing to God as he's going to do something that God forbids, and doing this whole sorcery of raising from the dead. And they compare it to someone who's a man who's with his mistress, cheating on his wife, swearing in the name of his wife about something. So it's just, it's showing the desperation of Shaul, the need and want that of him to connect to Hashem, but he doesn't know how, and he's just so confused and really, really just so desperate at this point. I know I keep saying that, but it's painful almost to see the level and the place of where he is right now. And the Isha, she agrees. He obviously convinces her, and she says, "Who do you want me to bring up?" And she brings up Shemuel. He says, "I want you to bring me up Shemuel." Now, the Isha sees, she brings up Shemuel, and the Isha sees, and she freaks out. She says, "You're Shaul, lama rimitani v'ata Shaul, why did you trick me?" So the Chamim, we're not going to go so into it because it's not the main focus of the story, but the Chamim go into how did she know it was Shaul after this? Was she tricking? Was she lying all along? And she knew it was Shaul, and now she's playing this act, and she couldn't really raise dead. She's manipulating him. She's giving him this idea as a self-fulfilling prophecy. What we're going to see what Shemuel says is maybe to get in his head. Or was she really able to raise the dead? This is also another discussion amongst the Hachamim. Was the command to destroy all this black magic because it is false, but it is a true a true, I don't want to say science, a true way to find out things, but it's just not the right way because we should connect to God and not these things? Or is it totally false, and that's why we should just not do it? Also another conversation, but just putting it out there. So a few classical things that I read about how she knew was, one is that most spirits will come up upside down, and because it was a king, Shemuel came up standing up, and that's why she knew it was Shaul. And others say that they would come as more of a wind or a whisper or something like that, and he came as a full spirit. Either way, she finds out, Shaul says, "Don't worry, nothing's going to happen to you. Tell me who you see. I need to know who you see." Because apparently she was seeing it and relaying the information to him. He wasn't seeing it. And she says, "Vatomer ish zaken again, this clothing, an old man who's wearing a coat, me'il, and from that description, he knew it was Shemuel. Again, this identifying clothing, and he bows to Shemuel's spirit. And now Shemuel is obviously not happy with this, and he says, "Why would you do this?" And he says, "Sarli me'od, I'm so stuck, right? I'm so stuck. I don't know what to do." He's literally, has nowhere to turn. The Plishtim are fighting me. God left me. I don't know what to do. Now, I put this in red because it's so ironic, comes full circle. He's calling Shemuel now in his final hour. I want you to tell me what to do. And this circles all the way back to one of his first wars in the Gilgal, when Shemuel told him, "Wait for me to tell you what to do," and he doesn't wait for him. And that was the beginning of his downfall, of not listening to God and not doing what was appropriate, and jumping the gun a lot and not having his patience. So it's so tragic and sad to see how he, at the end of his life, he's trying to do these, maybe not trying, but subconsciously trying to do these tikkunim, excuse me, and reconnect to God and the right way, the right path. And Shemuel says, obviously God left you. He told you, right? He said God took the malchut and gave it to David. Now, this is very powerful if you're Shaul hearing this, because Shaul knew this, but it was never said like this. Because in the beginning, Shemuel just said it's going to be given to someone better than you. And here it's saying, Le David. So this is like a huge slap in the face, a huge realization of all his worst nightmares coming true is what's happening now with Shaul. And he tells him the same way you didn't listen with Amalek and all this, right? Again, he's reviewing why he lost the Malchut. And he says, Vayten Hashem gam et Yisrael imcha biyad Plishtim machar ata ubanecha imi. Gam et machane Yisrael yiten Hashem biyad Plishtim. He says, tomorrow you're going to lose the war with the Plishtim, you're going to die, and your sons are going to die. And the Hachamim read on the fact that it says, you'll be with me, is that he's going to end up being, in Olam Haba, in a close place with Shemuel, with God, that he will do some sort of tshuva and tikkun, which we'll see, that he won't be totally forsaken, Shaul. But he does hear this horrible news, obviously. He hears that David is 100% obviously taking the malchut from him. He hears he's going to die. He hears his sons are going to die. He hears the war, the nation's going to lose the war. And he loses it. I read, actually, it's interesting. It seems that it might be that he fainted, which is very valid. I didn't bring the whole psukim. It's very valid, fits the psukim because it says he was so nervous and stressed he didn't eat. So it could be that he wasn't eating, he wasn't drinking, he literally fainted from his fatigue, from his stress. It all just got too much after the news and he fainted. Or I read another interpretation that he literally threw himself on the floor and couldn't take the news. Both are fitting, and it's just interesting. I bought the psukim, again, full circle, and just so tragic. All this is that when we met him, he was mishachmo umala gavo mikol ha'am. He was above the nation. Right? It repeats how he's above physically, and he's above the nation, and now he's totally down. The woman and his servants end up feeding, giving him some food and giving him some water, reviving him. And he leaves and he's left with this news. It's the night before the battle. He's left with this news. Now what's going to happen? So now, if we think about Shaul's character, it's very out of character for him to say the next morning, I'm going to go to this war and accept my fate. Because as we saw, he sort of knew his fate all along and he kept trying to manipulate it and get to David and kill David. So the fact that we will see he's going to go out to war is looked at as a big positive, and it's looked at as the fact that he's finally accepting his place, he's finally accepting the word of God, and he's going in full-heartedly, knowing what's going to happen, but not trying to escape or manipulate it. And that is looked at by the commentators, by the Chamim, as a big shevach and a big tikkun and tshuva to Shaul and his life. So then, but before we see what happens with Shaul exactly, we jump back again to David's story. I said we're going back and forth. So now the Saneh Plishtim, the Plishti rulers, the heads of, I don't know exactly the terms. I'm trying to think of the exact translation, but the rulers, they're stationing their army. They're getting all ready to literally go out and fight this war. As we jump back to what was happening with David, and David and his people are with Achish. Interesting to note, it says ve'achrona im Achish, they're in the back, which is interesting to note that the kings of Israel are always supposed to be in the front, and the Plishti king Achish is in the back, protected by his people, not on the front lines, almost similar to Shaul, always being in the ma'agal, always being circled and protected by his soldiers.
That's what the Arabs do today, no, John?
I am not a military expert, so I don't know.
No, I just mean they hide behind others.
They're hiding behind. Yeah.
But also, I'm still not fully understanding why God is being so unforgiving. It's not the God that we know. Like when Shaul is reaching out, why doesn't he deserve relationship?
Because at this point, it's too little, too late. It's too little, too late. He sealed his fate time and time again, and it's a last act of desperation. But I think it's too little, too late. And I think it's a lesson. We'll go more into this a little bit later, but it's a lesson to us all that yes, God is forgiving, and we have this gift of tshuva, but tshuva is a gift, and there is a level where we get ourselves so deep into a certain mindset and into a certain framework that we can't get out of it. And it seems that we see it in a way in Shaul that even though he seems that he's trying to get to God, he's not doing it in a proper way of doing real tshuva. He's doing it in a way of going to Balat Ov, so it is tainted. Like it is very, it's pure on the one side. It's his intentions are pure, but his way of doing it is not,
It's depressing.
he's one of the most, I think Shaul is really the most tragic figure one of the most tragic figures in Tanakh because, well, I want to talk about it after his death and I'll go back to it, but he's very tragic and we're going to talk about that in a minute. I just want to get there. So now we get, I'm gonna gloss through this a little bit because it's not so crucial to what I want to talk about. I mean, very interesting and totally study it and read it, but not so crucial to what I want to talk about right now, is this conversation with Achish and his people and David. So like I said, we switch back the scene to David and he's going out to war with Achish and the Plishtim are not having it, the other generals and leaders. They're like, Ma Ivrim ha'elu, again, Ivrim, derogatory. What are these people doing with us? Achish says, this is David, Eved Shaul, Melech Yisrael, Asher Ayaiti Ze Yamim, or Ze Shanim, V'lo Matzati Bo Me'uma. This was the servant of Shaul, who's now with me, and I haven't found anything bad about him this whole time. And the Plishtim basically force him, and they say, he's going to cause us problems in the war. He's the one that was killing so many Plishtim, and they sing, Yikashu Balafav David B'Yuvotav. Right, they would like not having David coming out to war with them, and then Achish calls David to the side, and he says, "Listen, David, I trust you and I respect you completely, and there's nothing I have against you, but my people, they're just not having it. So how about you just go back, go sit this one out, so sit this war out, and everything will be fine. I don't want to start, war, civil, war, civil problems with my people. I want to go fight Israel and have a nice day." So David says, listen, what did I do? He's trying to defend himself. He calls him Adoni HaMelech, which is what he called Shaul at many points. And he's, and Achish says, listen, I know I have nothing against you, but let's just not cause problems with Plishtim. You go back. And David goes back. So like I said, David was able, through the luck of the Plishtim, not, you want to say luck, maybe he was manipulated by God, whatever you want, however you want to look at it. He doesn't go to this final battle. And obviously, you can always ask the question of what would happen if he would have. We don't know, but it's interesting to ponder. And it's just interesting. When I look at the language again, it's like on the one hand, you feel like Achish is being naive and doesn't believe his people, but there's certain language where maybe Achish also is a little bit afraid that David's going to come and he wants to blame it on his people. Because he says, why would he bring up Eved Shaul Melech Yisrael? And why would he bring, it just seems that he has a little bit of a hint of something and he keeps blaming on people. So I'm not really so 100% bought in on his naivete. I do see it like 90% of the time, but there is little hints of maybe he was a little bit weary as well. So David goes back to Siklag and he sees a big travesty that the Amalekim came and destroyed his camp and kidnapped his wife, not his, meaning yes, his, but all the soldiers, they left their wives and children and family behind, right? They weren't going to war with them. So the wives and the children were in the city. The Amalekim came, they destroyed the city, and they kidnapped all the women and children. And it says all the people, and it says, Ushte Nashe David, Achinoam Israeli, Abigail Ishnav Kamili. David had three wives. Michal, the daughter of Shaul, was one of them. But we will see that when he ran away, that Shaul gave her to someone called Paltiv El Ben Laish, and he's going to come up later when after Shaul's death, he's going to come up, and we'll see what happens with Michal and that whole saga. But keep that for next time. So the people of David are distraught, and they're like really, they're crying, they're so angry that they're about to kill David. They're about like Lasaklo, they're about to stone him. And it says, Vayitchazek David b'Hashem Elohav, like David always does. He finds strength in God. And what does he do? He calls Eviatar HaKohen. If you remember, he ran away from Nob with the Urim and Tumim. And he says, ask God if I should go run after and fight the Amalekim. And God says yes, and he goes. Now, again, this is all juxtaposed. Shaul is asking God in every which way, and God doesn't answer him. David asks God, answers him right away. This whole David also, when he fights Amalek, which is a big deal, it happens by accident, so to speak. It wasn't a planned war that he went out to. It was a responsive war, where Shaul was more of a manipulative, planned war. So it's just interesting to see these mirroring things. So now they're going to fight the Amalekim, and they find this Ish Mitzri, this Egyptian man, and he looks like he's obviously not in a good state. They give him some water and food to like revive him, get him, make him better. And they say, "What's going on? Why are you here?" And he says, "I haven't eaten. I haven't eaten or drank for 3 days. My master is an Amaleki, and I got sick, and I couldn't keep up with the battle, and they left me here. They left me for dead, basically." So we see that the lack of chesed of the Amalekim, and the opposite of the chesed of Israel, David and his men, of reviving this man, leads to the victory of Amalek, because the victory of David over Amalek, because now this Nad Amaleki tells them where they're camped, and I didn't bring the whole war, but David and his people go to where the camp was, and they fight them, and they win, and they get back all their wives and children and everyone. And it says nobody was killed. None of the captives were killed. Then we get to an interesting point, which is going to be something just to remember about David later on, is that at the end, in the battle, he split up, the army was split, 400 that went out to the war and 200 that were protecting camp. And when they were dividing the spoils, the people were saying, why should the people that were protecting camp get the equal amount of spoils? We were the ones fighting. And David sets this precedent that everyone is equal in the battle, all their jobs are important, everyone gets the spoils. And he sends, I bought psukim, I'm not going to go through them now, but he sends also part of the spoils to all these different cities that he ran through when he was running from David, and from Shaul, and it's just showing that David has this idea of hakarat hatov, of being grateful and responding to those that had showed him a kindness. So just something about David's leadership. And we see, by the way, that David is seemingly always able to appease the people and calm them down, even when they're Bnei Belial, which it says here that, I don't know if I brought the pasuk here, but it says the Bnei Belial came to him and complained about this, whereas Shaul was macharish for the Bnei Belial, and he didn't respond to them. So now we get to the juiciest part of it all, Shaul's death. So put yourself in Shaul's eyes for a second, in Shaul's mind for a second. He knows God has left him completely. He knows there's no turning back for him, but he decides to go into battle, and the battle is bad. His sons are killed. The Plishtim are completely surrounding him. He's wounded at this point. It doesn't seem like he's going to make it. The Plishtim are coming. And Shaul says to his Na'ad, to his I'm getting the word in English, but his sidekicks, his soldier with him, he says, just kill me, because at least I'll die a death of honor, as opposed to the fact if the Plishtim get me, they're going to torture me, they're going to embarrass me. It's not something which we see they will end up doing. They'll defile his body after. And the Nosei Kelim says, no, I can't do it. He's afraid. And Shaul falls on his sword. And when the Nosei Kelim sees that Shaul died, he also kills himself. And this war is bad. And all these, Shaul, his sons were killed. The Plishtim captured a bunch of cities. A bunch of Israel ran away. And it was obviously not good. And wait, did I not bring the psukim? Hold on. No, not this. No. Oh, wait, I'm going backwards. Okay, here. Sorry. The next day, after the battle, the Plishtim find Shaul's body and his son's body, and like Shaul knew they would, they cut off their heads, they pass it around, they make it a big spectacle, they embarrass him, they hang up their bodies on a wall, they have their armor all laid out to show their victory. It's a big, big busha. As we know, desecrating dead is a very, looked down upon and very, not worthy thing in Judaism. We bury, we're supposed to bury before nightfall. If someone, God forbid, passed away, we don't leave the body out. We bury them as soon as possible. And this is just a real big embarrassment, especially to the king and the princes, and the sons. And the people of Yavesh Gilad, again coming full circle, they hear what happened. They go in the night. They take the bodies. They give them a proper burial, and they fast for 7 days. They give him a proper shiva, proper mourning period. And again, if you remember, Yavesh Gilad was the people that Shaul saved in this first war with Nachash Amoni, and it's all coming full circle. His whole career is coming full circle in a sense in his death. The fact that the fact that he wasn't able to connect to God, the fact that Yavesh Gilad, all these things. Now, it's I'm not going to go to that right now. The fact that Doris, she's here, I'll shout you out, but Doris asked me, he was when I told her I was doing this, that this was the topic of the class, and she said, but why do we so hard on Shaul? She said it now a minute ago also. Like, he was the first one to become king. He's the first one in this job. What do we expect from him? This is an unprecedented job. How do we expect him to really, level up properly? And the answer I really, found and came up with is that we do have a blueprint. We have a blueprint in the Torah, in Kitavo, where it talks about, I brought this in all the way in the beginning of the series when I spoke about what it was and how Shaul had these qualities, that a king should not have too much money, not have too many wives, not have Susim and go to Mitzrayim, to make sure he's not above his nation. All these things, all these qualities that we saw very clearly. I'm not going to, we don't have time to go over them now, but feel free to look back, that all these qualities that Shaul did have. So I think it shows us a lesson to all of us is that, yes, he was the first king, but he had the potential to be the best, not the best, but to be an amazing first king and do an amazing job. And his blueprint was the Torah. And the same way, each of us in our own lives, we're the only ones that could do whatever job we need to do. And only we know the answer to what that really is, what tikkun. Each of us have our own individual tikkun olam, our own individual process that we need to fix and rebuild in this world. And the only blueprint we have, that we individually have, is what, the mitzvot and the laws and the knowledge we have from the Torah. So the same way that you could have all this potential and have the blueprint in the Torah and still mess up. And it's not saying it's not hard. Of course it's hard, but it's doable. Hard does not mean unattainable, So I think that that's something we have to realize. Because David didn't have much of an example. If you want to talk about, he was a second king, but Shaul wasn't the best example, and he was able to step up. And we still say, David Melch Yisrael Chai V'Kayam, the kids, my daughter's still singing it all day, So it's something that it's really, it's tragic that he couldn't live up to it, but at the end of the day, he couldn't. So that's just his fate, not everyone's able to step up to the role they're in. Not everyone's able to do the job that they need to do, spiritually or, not spiritually or whatever it may be. So just, give me a couple more minutes. I know it's, let's just get a couple more minutes because I want to sum it all up and see how the main thing that I want, the thing I want to sum up, so we could jump into David next time, is David's response to Shaul's death, which is very important moving forward as the new leader. Because what's going to happen is, we'll see. Shaul dies, right? He gets killed. We just saw. Well, he kills himself. So, however you want to look at it. But David, while this is all happening, David is fighting Amalek, right? These two wars are happening simultaneously, which is also very interesting to notice because, as we said before, the king has to fight Amalek. So while the current king is dying by the hands of Plishtim, the next king is getting himself ready by fighting Amalek. So it's just interesting how this is all happening at the same time. So Shaul dies, and David obviously knows the Plishtim are out to war because Achish went out to war. He knows what's going on, and he wants to hear what happens. So 3 days later, there's someone comes from the war. Bagadav Kruim, his clothes are ripped, is a sign of mourning. Adama al Rosho, another sign of mourning. Ash on his head. He falls in front of David and bows to David. And David says, "Who are you? What happened? You know what's going on in the war." and he's not Amaleki, which is interesting, also full circle of Shaul's life. Not Amaleki is telling about his death. And we're going to see there's discrepancies in his story versus to the story that we just read in the read before. And these I'll tell you what happens, and then we'll talk about the discrepancies. But he says, I ran away from the war. A lot of people died. Shaul died, and Yonatan, his son, died. Now, David says, how do you know this? Like, why should I believe you? And he says, I happened to be on Har al-Gilboa where it was happening. Shaul fell on his sword, and all the Plishtim are coming to him, and he asked me to kill him because he didn't want to die in the hands of Plishtim. And I knew he wasn't going to die, so I killed him, and I took his crown and his cuff. He obviously had like some symbolic cuff for a king, on his arm, and I give it to you. I give it to you, my master. So now this doesn't seem like exactly what happened, because it says that he fell on his sword and the Nosek Halim didn't kill him. So there's two possible answers of what happened. Or it could be that the Amaleki saw this and made up the story that he did it thinking he would find favor in David's eyes, because it seemed most people still believe that David wanted Shaul dead, even though he repeatedly doesn't want that. And we're going to see what happens now. Or it could be that maybe this is the continuation, and when Shaul fell on his sword and the Nag fell on his sword, the Nag maybe thought he was dead or knew he was going to die, but then he wasn't fully dead, and this Amaleki did come, and this all happens, sequentially. Either way, it's not really important. The fact is how David's going to respond to it. I mean, it is important, but it's not necessarily so important to what the themes I want to talk about right now. It's all important. And David takes his clothes, he rips his clothes immediately. He's crying and making the whole big, they fast. Shaul al Yonatan, and the fact that Yisrael lost this big war. And David says, who are you? And he says, Amaleki Anochi. And he says, how dare you? How did you not fear to lay a hand on the Mashiach Hashem? We see this coming again and again. When David had the opportunities to kill Shaul, we don't kill Mashiach Hashem, right? He keeps talking about that. We don't kill Mashiach Hashem. We don't kill Mashiach Hashem. He says, how dare you? You have blood on your hands, right? You are Damecha al Roshecha. You are worthy of death. Your blood is on your own hands, on your own head. And he sentences him to death because he killed Shaul. And then I brought the psukim here, but feel free to read them. I'm not going to go into them now. But David says a kinah, he says a lamentation on Shaul and Yonatan, on the death. And it's very beautiful, it's very poetic. And it basically talks about ech naflu giborim, how did these warriors fall? How did this happen? How did we get to this place? They were such amazing men, and they fell. And this is sort of a theme of David. We're going to see moving forward that he makes it very clear to anyone to anyone in the nation that he wants no part in any fall of Shaul's family. He doesn't want Shaul. He wasn't happy with Shaul's death. He wasn't happy with his son's death. And later we're going to see when they have a civil war and people kill other people on the side of Shaul and think that it's going to be good for them in their relation with David. It never ends well. And David does stand true to what he promised Yonatan and what he promised Shaul. He will not take any retaliation to Shaul's family. So that's a very important theme we're going to see in the weeks coming forward when David, he doesn't slide into his malchut so easily, and we're going to see how that all plays out. And this is a very important theme of David's setting the tone of how he's going to respond to these things. I just brought this as also another full circle thing, is there's a lot of similarities between the death of Eli Kohen way in the beginning of the book and the death of Shaul and how they're told. When Eli dies, it says, Vayerat ish Binyamin ma'amaracha. There's a Binyamin man that ran from the war. And again, begadav kru'im adama rosho, same thing like the Nat Amaleki. Again, he also, similar thing, his sons die on the same day as him. The war was a really bad war for Israel, not only personally for the king, for the leader. And it's actually, Chamim find this connection so strong that they say that Ish Binyamin was Shaul, actually, that told about his death. So it's just interesting to note that. So just to sum up all this, what I want to end with Shaul is a couple of things, and just to really wrap it up, is that we meet Shaul as this ideal, perfect, so much potential, and we leave him with not being able to grasp it, with getting too far gone, getting himself in a spiral that he can't get out of. And no matter what he does, he just lost it, but he accepts it. And I think the tragedy of Shaul is that he doesn't go down fighting. He he doesn't go down trying to escape his death. He fully accepts his death, and he fully accepts his fate. And I think that that's where Shuvah comes from, is he finally stops trying to control everything and stops trying to manipulate. And he just accepts his place. And sadly and tragically, that acceptance leads to his death. But it's also, that's also the tragedy, but it's the beauty of him finally acting as true, true to his identity and true to his leadership in his death. So it's a very, again, Shaul to me is one of the saddest people in Tanakh, tragic people. And through all that, we mirror how David is fighting Amalek. David is getting himself more and more connected with the people by sending out the spoils. And we're going to see, stay tuned for next week, little cliffhanger. We're going to see how David does start to take his role as king, but it's not going to be a simple task, and he's going to have a lot of hardships to fully get there. So thank you. I'm happy to take any questions, comments, and Chanukah Sameach. Oh, just one more point, actually, just to my little 2 cents to connect it to Hanukkah, because it is Hanukkah, is Shaul went in accepting his fate and knowing his fate. And that's a little bit what the Maccabim did, is that they went in fully trusting in God and Mila Shem Elai and Rabim Meyan Natim, and knowing that they didn't really have a chance unless God stepped in. And in their case, obviously, in the Nes of Hanukkah, God did step in. We were worthy at that moment. We did step up for our identity. It's a very similar theme, but almost opposite. Is that the Maccabim stood up for their identity, and they stood strong in their identity and were able to win. And Shaul sort of accepts his identity, accepts his place, but it's more of a last call for him. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jen. That's uber depressing.
I don't think it's depressing, though. I don't think it's depressing. It's sad.
I really do. I feel very, very sad. Like, that's how the monarchy of Israel begun. And it almost is like, is it just foreshadowing to us that the whole monarchy concept is just not a viable one?
So that's a very interesting question in terms of way back to the beginning, which I'm not going to go into now because already we're done.
I know that whole
but just food for thought of the original question is monarchy something positive, or is it just to appease us as people that need leadership? That's also a lot of debate back and forth about that. But I also think,
and if you want to talk about the Chet HaEgel metaphor that we spoke about, I think I was listening to that in a previous class, when Shaul has to wait for Shemuel to come and do the Olot Zvachim, right? Even that over there, it referenced the same issue, the people needing leadership and not being comfortable waiting.
I think it's also not being comfortable waiting, but it's also not being fully comfortable in realizing
without
that leadership we need is God. Yeah. And I think that's a very hard thing to digest but we are human. I don't think that we should expect other. We need a physical human leader as well. It's very.
Who do we have today? We have no one today. We're alone. There is no one leader.
We're in Galut. I mean,
I know we're in Galut, but
that's what you're saying.
The question: was there ever a one leader that was good enough? Was there ever a one leader that it's like the only one that's going to be is Mashiach? That's just what it sounds
yes
like.
And no, because we do see. I mean, listen. Yes, we're gonna. If anyone wants to leave me in the Arts conversation, feel free. But what I was gonna say is that, like, you see that. I mean, this is a further study, obviously, after Sefer Shemuel, we obviously get to Melachim, and that's, the whole story of Melachim is a big mess. So there is this, we see, yes, 100%, we see this light of leadership, of true Malchut, very sporadically, but I think it's a two-sided thing. I think one of the things comes from the fact of proper leadership, but also I think it comes from the fact of being worthy as a nation of a proper leader. Because as we look back to the story of the Sefer Shoftim, it talks about, a lot of the commentators and Nachum talk about, is that the Shoftim and the leaders that people got were a product of the nation and where they were at that moment. So if they had these haphazard leaders, or a leader it was a product of the people. And I mean, I don't want to get political, but if you look at what's going on in the world at large, all these big democracies, and you see the leaders and you see what's going on, it's like, yeah, it's a little bit of product of the people and what's going on. And it doesn't just happen out of nowhere, So there's also that. It's a two-sided coin. So I think it has to do with individual. It's all. I mean, this is a whole nother discussion.
I know it is.
Of individual, in your individual malchut, and your individual finding your place in the nation itself. It's a whole chain of events. But yeah, I think for another time.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks for coming, Dara. This is fun. Always fun when you come. All right.
Okay, we'll talk.
Thanks, everyone.
Right now.
Yeah, we'll talk. Thanks, everyone, for coming.